Good afternoon, everybody. I hope you can hear us and see us correctly. I am Irene Rusconi, and then I'm a communication assistant for the BridgeGap project. And we are here to host the presentation of Ina Kubbe's contribution. This is episode 4 of the BridgeGap Talk Series called Anticorruption in Progress. BridgeGap Talk Series is a format that gives the chance to connect with leading experts and rising stars in the field of anti-corruption and transparency. And in this episode, Hina Kubbe, which is a researcher at Hebrew University of Tel Aviv University, will discuss the story corruption and informal practices in the Middle East and North Africa, a pooled cross-sectional analysis, which is a study co-authored with Fatih Kirshalni, sorry for the pronunciation, and Wisnu Sediati Nugroho. And I leave the floor to Ina to present the study. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, thanks to all the people that joined for this talk. So, as Irene said, this is like a paper that I'm currently working on with two other colleagues, with Fatih and Vishnu. So I'm a political scientist, I'm a comparative political scientist, and my colleagues are also working on political science, but with a stronger focus on economy, basically they're economists. And we try to figure out how basically bribery or like corruption in general looks in the MENA region. In connection to informal practices, which you can imagine is very challenging to measure, to capture at first, to define, also to measure. And this will be now like the main focus of this presentation. First of all, why is it relevant? We know that the MENA region is suffering a lot from corruption. It has been suffering for a very long time already. And compared to other regions in the world, we see that there are higher levels of bribery in particular. And the Corruption Perception Index is only one of the many indicators that providing basically evidence on that. And we know that corruption is, of course, very detrimental, in particular when it's happening in a region that has already like weak state capacities, economic instability, which is affected by a lot of conflicts and wars. And of course, related to this, there are also a lot of security challenges. And our assumption is that these higher levels of bribery in the MENA region are facilitated by informal practices. And these are some examples that you can see here on the slide. Wasta, for example, is an informal practice that we see a lot in the Middle East. It's reciprocity or combina. Combina means like someone gives a favor with the expectation that there is something in return in the future. And our assumption is that these informal practices are shaping the daily life in a lot of countries in the Middle East and are also facilitating corruption. The problem is we don't really know when it's still an informal practice and when does it translate into corruption, but we try to bring more light into that. What are our contributions here? First of all, we try to design like more culturally attuned anti-corruption measures because we know like this one size fits all approach. And so that's why it's important to go more into specific to understand the context behind. And we try that like the analysis of informal practices related to bribery will give us some more insights on how we can also design anti-corruption measures in a different way. There is some literature on the MENA region and corruption, but in particular related to the detrimental effects in the economic and the political and social sphere. But we still don't have a lot of information on, or like we don't have like a systematic empirical analysis of bribery levels in the MENA region, in particular related to informal practices. So our main contributions are, first of all, an empirical analysis, and we try to focus, or we focus on 5 key sectors: the education, the judiciary, medical, police, and permit services. And we are comparing the MENA region, so to say, with the rest of the world as a reference, because we try to understand if informal practices are really something that's special to the MENA region related to corruption or to bribery. And a second contribution is the cultural explanation of bribery, because, as I said, we are assuming that these higher levels of bribery can be explained through informal practices such as the 3 I mentioned before, that seems to be like deeply rooted in the structure of everyday life. These are our guiding research questions. First of all, why do actually informal practices exist that could drive corruption? How do informal practices contribute to corruption? What sectors are most affected, and how can policy account for these cultural norms? To give you like a theoretical background or provide some definitions and concepts that we are working with, I think I don't have to go too deep into the 1 second. I think my screen is paused, right? Again. We with the definition of corruption as the abuse of power for private gain. We know that there are a lot of discussions around this definition because it has a lot of limitations. But for now, this is our working definition. Our focus is more informal practices, which means that these are it includes that these are strategies like behaviors, transactions, basically to navigate inefficiencies or limitations within formal systems. So when formal institutions don't work, we know human beings are very creative. We're always looking for informal practices because they help us, or they help individuals in general, like to get access to the healthcare sector, to the education sector, to the police, and so on. And they're often driven by personal relationships, by social networks, by family structures, and of course also cultural traditions, which also points to the historical, to the power of dependency on this development of informal practices. And they can include forms also like nepotism, clientelism, or other cultural specific mechanisms. These informal practices exist because, of course, they have a lot of advantages. I mean, they are there to regulate our daily life, and as I said, they help us also to get access to goods that are not provided by the state, because the state might fail, or the government might fail to provide citizens with these kind of social services. Informal practices are often affected or sustained by social norms, by social structures, and, as I said, historical legacies, which makes it even more complicated to understand. And you can see here the definition of social norms, which are unwritten rules within the society and providing a framework for what is acceptable. So, for instance, a social norm is, we know all of this, that we shake hands when we see each other, that we might bring flowers to a birthday. In a lot of countries, it's like to provide gifts, to bring gifts to a specific occasion. But we also know in a different context could be considered as a bribe, as a form of corruption. So, of course, we need to understand what are the social norms in a society, but also, of course, what are the informal practices by that. So there are 2 sides of informal practices. There's a bright side and there's a dark side. And I will talk also about the bright side, not only about the dark side, which means it can result into corruption, because informal practices systems. So here you can see a comparison of both. First of all, you see the definition of corruption and informal practices. I won't read this now because I already discussed that. It's important to understand what is the purpose or what is the motivation behind that. So corruption, we know we need a lot of, we still need a lot of knowledge about this. What are the motivations behind corruption? So we know that could be driven by personal greed or exploitation of resources unlawfully. When we talk about informal practices, they are driven by the need to navigate basically systematic inefficiencies or fulfill cultural and social obligations because formal institutions cannot provide that. The mechanisms behind corruption could involve illicit activities, you know these forms, bribery, fraud, or embezzlement as one of the examples. And informal practices rely on personal relationships, networks, and culturally accepted practices. So it can also be favoritism or clientelism. So we can also say informal practices are corruption because they are considered as favoritism. When we talk about the culture, corruption is universally or should universally viewed as unethical or illegal. This is not necessarily the case when we talk about informal practices. So they can often be, they are often legitimized or morally accepted within a specific society because this is how it is. This is how a specific society works. When we talk about the impact on systems, corruption actively undermines and disrupts formal institutions and can cause systematic inefficiencies. And we have a lot of research on that that's providing evidence, while informal practices often coexist with these formal systems. And some examples you can see here. For corruption, we notice bribing an official for a favorable court ruling or embezzling public funds for personal enrichment. And for informal practices, using wasta, for example, to secure a job by bypassing formal application processes, or using combina to bypass bureaucratic delays, such as obtaining a parking permit through connections with a local authority. So basically, you know someone, maybe from the university, maybe from your family, and this person is helping you to get, in this case, a specific permit. And what is the interplay? When we talk about corruption, corruption can be facilitated by informal practices when these evolve into systematic bypasses of merit and fairness. Informal practices can lead to corruption when these informal practices basically undermine formal rules or involve even financial inducements. What are the advantages of informal practices? Because I said before, there's a bright side. I mean, they make a lot of sense. Otherwise, people wouldn't use them. First of all, informal practices can increase interpersonal trust and solidarities in communities. This is something you can basically rely on because you can't rely on the state or the government. So at least you can rely on your networks, on your friends and your family. One example is hamula, when it's like reinforcing tribal loyalty or community support networks. Informal practices are reducing transaction costs. Makes a lot of sense because it's speeding up the processes. You save time, you spend efforts. So wasta helps citizens bypass red tape to obtain government services more quickly, for example. Informal practices are in general like stabilizing the system because they act as an alternative governance channel. So at least, as I said, you can rely on these informal practices. One example from Tunisia, where informal networks can help to stabilize service provisions despite the state inefficiency. So at least we know that these informal practices can bring you like a service provision. And they also provide predictability and identity. So one example is here when we talk about Jordan or Palestine, where wasta is not only a mechanism to access jobs or services, but also they affirm your place within a family or like a tribal network. So this is then in turn reinforcing identity and community roles because you see basically where is your role within this community. And another advantage is governance responsiveness. So it reflects responsive adaptations. to the community needs when the state institution falls short. We tried to picture this in this illustration, like how is it all connected? And I mean, it's a very simplified illustration, of course, but just to show you how we expect the relations between social norms, informal practices, and corruption. So you can see here, there's informal practice, it's in the middle, and social norms, which we see, of course, in the society, are guiding our behavior, which then also have an influence on informal practices. The one social norm could be that in a specific society, you want your kids to go to a specific university or to a specific school. This is like the expectation. And then you might use some informal practices to get your kids there. And you understand that the system doesn't really work, so there's a system inefficiency. And that's why you're using this informal practices as an alternative channel. And you can see that this has an adaptive mechanism alternatively to formal institutions. So you can see here that informal practices, on the one hand, might maintain stability and predictability, increase interpersonal trust. I just talked about this on the previous slide. But also it can enable corruption. And this is, of course, the dark side that we try to figure out, like, where is basically the translation and how can we work with this in anti-corruption mechanisms. So one question would be, but are wasta, hamula, and combina not forms of corruption? Are we not basically measuring the same thing here? And the answer is yes, but not always, because it depends on the context. These practices, first of all, of course, they favor specific individuals based on personal ties, tribal affiliation, or reciprocity. And I mean, these forms just have different names in different countries. In Germany, we call it like vitamin B, Vitaminbeziehung. We call it in Russia blood. So in every country, basically, there are terms for that. And Alina Ledineva published like this amazing overview also of informal practices depending on the region. And they are often morally acceptable and culturally normalized when we talk about the MENA region because they coexist with formal institutions but undermine them. So when do they become corruption? Let's take the example here of using wasta. So you asked your cousin for help to get a job interview. And I'm sure all of us, we were involved like in similar situations already. Or combina to fast-track paperwork without a bribe, and it's just a favor. But of course, you expect in the future that the person will give you something back. When is it corruption? When it's favoritism and abuse of power. And I mean, of course, favoritism includes always abuse of power because it's entrusted power for private gain. Using wasta to bypass a rule and hire an unqualified candidate. Hamula, loyalty leading to unjust court rulings or land fraud, or combina to rig a public procurement process. So you can see here that the key distinction is that informal practices are not inherently corrupt. They can, but they do not necessarily have to be, because as you could see, they also help people a lot in their daily lives when the government is not doing their job in the correct way. So they can create pathways to corruption, especially when they breach legal norms, when they violate merit-based procedure. So in this case, when we take the example here of using wasta to ask a cousin for help to getting a job interview, which is still okay, but if it would result in breaching legal norms or violate merit-based procedures, this is then a form of corruption. To summarize it with Ledineva and with Alina Ledinevas and Claudia Baez Camargo quote, they said, where informality stops and corruption begins is context dependent, blurry, and culturally loaded. So you see, we still need a lot of research here. So in short, to summarize it, favoritism via wasta or combina can be corruption, but not all informal practices are necessarily illegal or even unethical within the cultural context. And I think it's important for us that we acknowledge like these nuances, so to say, these different facets when we talk about anti-corruption measures, especially in the MENA region. So we can see that informal practices are on a continuum. And here again, you see on the left side, informal practice, but not corrupt. And I just discussed this, wasta to get a job interview, combina to speed up paperwork, and so on. But it's gray, it's in between on the way to corruption, as you can see here on the right side, when it's provincial treatment, bypasses procedure, or when it's ethically unclear. Here, when we talk about wasta to skip a medical queue, which is already like unethical, because who's deciding who is sicker than someone else, who should be preferred when we talk about medical treatment, and so on. And it would be corruption when wastas to hire an unqualified unqualified person in public office. So you can see it's quite challenging because we have this continuum, and usually like it's in between. So in the end, it's about the context, it's about intent and outcome, which means we really have to analyze it in the specific situation, the context, the circumstances, and so on, because it lies on a spectrum. And of course, this is very important when we talk about culturally sensitive anti-corruption strategies. How do informal practices contribute to corruption? Just to sum it up, so that it's clear, first of all, it works parallel to governance. There are blurred boundaries between informal and illicit. We also say that rule breaking because it's rewarding personal networks. As I said, in a lot of countries, it works like this because the state doesn't really work in an efficient way. But on the other hand, it also means that personal networks are more important, of course, than education in this case. So in the long term, it can even lead to lower levels of education because there's no incentive to go to university or to get a good degree, because in the end, you know, you get the jobs or you get the things done based on your personal network. So long term, it's also damaging, of course. And it's basically like a legit form to hide corruption, because it's something that's more acceptable in cultures. How do we try to answer our research questions? How do we get basically answers to them? It's a very strong statistical analysis. It's very, very quantitative, although we're talking about concepts, but we try at least to bring some light into that. We are working with the Global Corruption Barometer from 2003 to 2013, plus macro data. And you can see here on the slide the kind of data we are using. We conducted a multi-nominal logistic regression and logic models with interaction terms. And Wiesner, for example, also conducted a lot of robustness checks to figure out if we're really measuring the right thing here and if our data is really, our results are valid. These are our key variables. First of all, the dependent one is bribery experience in these 5 sectors, because we also want to figure out like which sectors are more vulnerable or more affected by corruption and informal practices than others. And the main independent variables are, a variable is the importance of personal contact, and it's measured on a scale, which is a proxy for informal practices. Other variables that we included are also gender, MENA region dummy, because as I said, we also try to understand if this is something special for the region. So we need a reference group. Years of education, GDP, human capital index, employment, and so on. And in our paper, we went already like to a review process. So there are some reviewers who said you have too many variables. Someone said there are not enough. So you can see that in the end, this is also kind of a compromise, or like these are the strongest variables. And as I said, we also have this regional focus to understand what are the differences between the MENA countries and non-MENA countries. Here you can see some of the results. So there's a paper that you can, of course, read, and it's because I'm sure this is not so easy read here, but at first we can see in all of these different sectors that we have strong relationships between bribery and importance of personal contact. We also see here there are significant relationships to the region. We see a relationship between being a man, years of education, and also the GDP, economic growth. So the main findings are basically that the importance of personal connections is a strong predictor of bribery across all of these five sectors: education, judiciary, medical, police, and permits. We see regional effects. So individuals in the MENA region show in general like higher bribery tendencies. And we see this in particular in the judiciary and in the police. As I said, there are also gender differences. So men are consistently more likely to engage in bribery. One explanation behind that can be that men are in general, like in the MENA region, maybe more often in contact with these sectors compared to women. When we talk about education, we see like a mixed effect. So a positive effect, in particular in the medical sector, which might imply that in healthcare settings, education can increase like the ability or even the willingness to engage in bribery, maybe also to higher expectations, resources to access. We don't find this pattern in the judiciary. And what's also confirming already previous studies, economic development has an impact. So we see there is a negative connection between GDP and bribery, which means that wealthier societies should actually also have stronger economic institutions and social safety, which in the end is lowering, or they should lower corruption risk. And we also see these differences between the sectors. So we see the strongest correlation between personal contact and regional location and bribery in the judiciary, in the police, and in the medical sector. So to sum it up, what are our main findings? We see that bribery is entrenched in social and economic structures, and in particular, informal networks are very dominant. So we are confirming our basic assumption. And if we want to develop effective anti-corruption strategies, of course, we need to consider this context and also combine institutional reforms with economic development, and very important, of course, also cultural understanding. Our robustness checks that we did were also confirmed our findings. And as I said, we went already through some review processes. So the statistical analysis were checked several times. And to conclude, and lessons learned, especially also, what does it mean for policymakers or decision makers? Informal practices are very central when we talk about the Middle East. When we talk about, like, if we try to figure out how we can reduce or limit corruption, so they don't play a minor role, they play a major role. They help, of course, to navigate weak institutions. And in the next step, of course, are reinforcing corruption, because they enable favoritism and excluding those people who do not have the connections, who do not have these networks. And it also shows that conventional approaches have limitations, because, of course, laws and enforcement are very important, but them alone are not sufficient, because they fail to address why people are relying on these informal networks. And I discussed this a lot at the beginning, like there are a lot of bright sides and a lot of advantages of informal practices. And so the cultural and institutional context, of course, has to shape anti-corruption policies. So in the end, we can say that it's about transforming and not dismantling informal networks. So they should actually develop from favors to formal networks, frameworks, and replace, for example, informal referrals with mentorships programs. It's very important that we institutionalize this trust-based support, because it works. Digital solutions might be another mean, of course, and it's a very a topic that is discussed a lot, not only in anti-corruption research. We also have to focus, of course, on the specific sectors, because we know corruption or informal practices in the educational sector look very different than the judiciary, medical sector, or in the police. So it's also important that we do not just outlaw informal networks, that we understand basically them and also reform them depending on the sector. And also to give this more sustainability, we should differentiate like between short-term, mid-term or medium-term and also long-term strategies. To digitalize processes is something that we can definitely work on. And there is another project that we're doing now where we try to understand how we can implement digital technologies in limiting corruption in the MENA region. And of course, in the long term, we should promote like civic values, integrity, and trust in formal institutions. But as I said, this is very long term and also very cliche. But of course, you can see from the data that also makes a lot of sense. The limitations of the study. First of all, the data is only covering the time from 2003 to 2013, which also implies that we couldn't consider basically newer anti-corruption initiatives or like in particular socio-political changes. But this is related to the availability of the data, so we couldn't expand this period for analysis. The proxy for informal practices. So the key variable is the importance of personal contact, which serves as a proxy. And of course, it's simplifying, as I said, differences between informal practices that are benign and those that are clearly corrupt, because there are a lot of gray zones in between the both. It's a cross-sectional design, so we are relying on pooled cross-sectional data. So of course, we cannot say anything about causal relationships or changes over time. Sectoral and contextual depth, I mean, it's very broad. The MENA region is very, very diverse. And of course, as I said, we always need to have a look at the specific situation, specific context in a specific country, and so on. And of course, it's also tending to generalize findings very quickly. So also here we need to be more cautious because, of course, there are a lot of differences between Gulf monarchies and North African republics, for example. So this is another limitation that also point, of course, to future studies. So first of all, as we're all doing, we need to develop better measurement tools. We need to create more refined indicators. Time series or panel data would be great to have like a focus also on changes. We should disaggregate, of course, the MENA region, as we should do in every region in the world. We should explore digital governance and also social norms, and also mixed method approach, which are always very helpful to combine like these quantitative models with more qualitative field work to understand like really the mechanisms and drivers behind that. So to conclude, informal practices are both adaptive, but also, of course, problematic. They make a lot of sense because there are a lot of benefits, a lot of advantages why people are using it. Anti-corruption needs a culturally attuned multi-level approach, as you can see. And future reforms should, of course, build formal institutions to provide what informal ones currently can offer. And these are access, trust, efficiency, and hopefully also equity in the future. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you very much, Ina, and greetings, everybody. For those of you who are not in the BridgeGap project, my name is Alina Mongiopepidi. I'm the chair of BridgeGap, and I'm very happy to see that somebody in our research group picked up on the wonderful work derived from Anticorp of Aliona Ledeneva on informal institutions. This being said, I'm sure it's going to be a lot of discussion on both conceptual approach and methodology around this paper. So let's already start this. I think I have seen a couple of hands up, if I'm not mistaken. We are joined by Professor Janine Wedel, our colleague from from George Mason University in the United States, who's an ethnographer. So absolutely, she would have been an ideal chair for this talk. And I'd like in the future to encourage people who present papers to find the best pair in the BridgeGap community to be a discussant for this, for their paper. Thank you, Janine. Please, floor is yours.
Okay, great. Thank you for your excellent presentation, Ina. I really appreciated it and enjoyed it. I'm wondering if you could go back a few slides. I have a number of questions and thoughts. Let's see. I want to go back to where you taught. First, I have several questions, and I won't dominate here, but I want to go back to where maybe this one. No.
The prostitutes?
No, after that. Somewhere you talk about the digital that sort of digital solutions, and the slide before that, I think it's maybe in your next slide where you talk about digital solutions, and anyway, I don't know where you I've seen it as you flip through, but now I don't see it. So anyway, it doesn't matter, but as you know, one of the correlates with the perception of corruption is the decline in trust in institutions. And there's research showing that decline, and as you know, that decline in trust in formal institutions is across the board throughout the world. It's growing even in places like Sweden, right? And it's whether we talk about institutions of government and parliaments and presidents, or business institutions, or media, or church, or military. Now, military is perhaps one of the only areas where trust has perhaps frighteningly has in some cases even risen. So there's also evidence showing that the institution of digital systems is fomenting or can foment this lack of trust, right? I used to be able to go into my bank and solve a problem. Now I go into the bank and the only thing they can do is get onto the same fucking, excuse my language, 800 number and call the central line. The autonomy has shifted to be more centralized. So the question becomes, how are digital solutions then really solutions, right? I mean, I just spent 3 hours today trying to solve a digital problem that could have been done face to face, right? And I can't do it. And so I realize more people are better the younger generation is better at this sort of thing, but I think it is across the board that there's something that this lack of ability to deal face to face with institutions is a problem for trust, and it certainly has to do with corruption, is correlated with corruption as well. So that's sort of one line of questioning, and maybe I'll start with that, because unfortunately I have to pop off in a couple of minutes for another call. But
Okay.
I also was wondering if you could send me your paper.
Sure.
I can put my email address in the chat. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great idea. May I encourage also other people, because this is really a complicated paper, and I think that can be questions raised at the concepts part, at the conceptualization of this, at the methodology part, because it uses macro data and individual data, and of course at the solutions part. Professor Wedel raised that it would really be great if we can systematize them a little bit. Right now, let's start with the solutions, as Janine has to leave us. So, Ina, if you can, please.
Sure. So the technological part is also something that I'm doing like research on, especially here in the region. So it's nice that you asked this question. So I'm currently doing expert interviews. I think it was now like 20 to try to figure out how we basically can implement more technologies or digital solutions. But in the case of disaster management, because like let's assume the system doesn't really work, there's no trust in the government, but at least we can rely on each other. So so this is something like how we can work with this interpersonal trust that we can find in some countries more than in others. So like I think this shows that in the MENA region there is a lot of interpersonal trust, especially because it's very like family oriented. And I mean, there are always like good sides and bad sides about this, but at first, technology is something that people seem to have some trust in. And I also always ask the question in the interviews, okay, but how can we make also technologies safer, especially in regions where we have, let's say, political unstable countries with people who are in power that we don't trust, and we don't know what's happening with this data. I mean, it can be abused very easily. On the other hand, technologies can also help to visit the blow if we have safe reporting mechanisms. So I see this as something that's can help a lot because it is reducing face-to-face meetings, because these are the situations where people can, I know, provide some gifts, can provide some money, for example. So I think this is one of the main goals, that it's really limiting the face-to-face interaction.
Right, but my point would be that face-to-face also is a trust builder.
I know.
And it also reduces, I mean, it's the flip side of what you're talking about. And you've talked about a dark and a bright side, right? So that's part of the issue that arises here. And then that it also reduces when you can't deal with somebody face to face and you can't get through on the phone to anyone. The institution becomes this nightmare monolith that you can have no faith in. So then it reduces the faith that people have in institutions, some research shows. So that's sort of the conundrum here.
But I think that's why it's important to focus on the sectors individually, because as we saw, like the judiciary is very affected by corruption and also informal practices. So that we focus, for example, on more technology in the judiciary and maybe have less focus on technology in other sectors, because as I said, it's also like it's a stick how societies work. But I think in general, the most promising solutions to corruption.
Thank you.
Okay, Jarine, do you want to put one more question to?
No, I think I better.
To Manuel Gerke, I think. But before I do, I just want to say another remark here, that we struggled for years to have these connections questions in the Global Corruption Barometer. The Global Corruption Barometer, it's a very... And let's say about 15 years ago, when we managed to introduce this connection question for the first time, it was also a lot of resistance, because at the time, corruption was very narrowly defined as just bribing, when in fact the theory, largely starting from Eastern Europe, from the work of people actually like Janine and other people like this, and mine and Aliona Ledenevas, was that actually corruptions are a complement to bribe, and that people who bribe are people who cannot resort to personal connections to the office holders who have the key to the favors. And therefore, intuitively, based on this literature, which meanwhile has quite a lot of evidence, because we had several rounds, we had other surveys, is that we will not find a and connections because they are actually alternatives. However, we might find at macro level, that societies which resort, which have, and we did find there is a strong correlation with informal economy. That societies which have a lot of informality also have a lot of corruption, because that actually means that the public sector is reduced to the part of the formal citizenship, right? So whoever is not included in the formal citizenship, for instance, when they need to go to the public hospital, they will have to bribe because they are not in any official system. So these are very well documented and published, and we even have quantifications. What gets in the way of analysis generally is difficulty, of course, of getting data, quantitative data on informal economy, which is as difficult as getting data on corruption. So explain. Very complicated. But let me go to Manuel, who is an accomplished quantitativist, because I'm sure he has quite a lot of questions. Please, Manuel.
Hello, everyone. Thanks, Ina, for the presentation. Yeah, so I think I had two questions. And one is, from what I understood, of course, I haven't read your paper yet. So yeah, take it with a grain of salt, what I'm going to say here. But from what I understood from your presentation, is that your theory is that the informal practices affect bribery differently in the MENA region vis-a-vis other regions, right? And please correct me if I'm wrong. And then the empirics, what you have shown is that you have more bribing in the MENA region when controlling for your proxy of informal practices, right? The personal connections.
Yeah,
is that
that's
correct?
It's more we see a lot of informality in the MENA region, as we also see a lot of informality as Alina said, like in, for example, post-communist countries. So we try to figure out if this is also facilitating then corruption in a society where you see a lot of is based on relationships, because as I said, it's very family based, in some countries even tribal oriented. We also see then higher levels of bribery, and this is what we confirmed compared to other regions in the world, because we had this data set of non-MENA countries as a reference.
Yeah. So what I think you do in the empirics is that you're showing the coefficient on MENA region is showing that you have more bribing in the MENA region when you're controlling for the other kind of your independent variable of interest, right? The level of connection. So yeah, I don't know. I felt a bit that it would be, might be worth exploring, do subsample for MENA region and then compare the coefficient on the role of informal practices, right, on bribing, and to play a little bit more with the data. And I wasn't sure, I don't know if you have I think you have robustness checks with fixed effects at the country and year level, right? This would also be interesting for us to take a look, because something that comes to mind, and I think it connects to some of the things that the previous person commenting on your paper was saying, that I think that the relationship between the social desirability bias for some of these things has changed, right, over time because of cell phones and of course this is only the last years of the period that you're looking at, right? But it would also be interesting whether and what do you do to address the fact that social desirability biases might be different across the countries. And is it do you do this by controlling for fixed effects for the countries? Do you do this? And yeah, and then the other kind of thing that comes to mind here would be it would be quite interesting to see, whether you look because you have, data on very, and that's something that I really liked about your presentation about, the data for the different sectors. So could you tease out a bit the mechanism by looking at specific countries, specific sectors, not have a substantial effect, right? And try to understand and give us a bit more sense when do informal practices lead to more bribery and when they don't, and in which specific contexts.
Yeah. Thank you so much, especially the statistical questions. I think I remember correctly that Wiesno also had a look at subsamples and specific countries. So like this is something like I have to ask Wiesno again, but I know we had a lot of back and forth about the statistics, but I'm happy to send you the paper and you can have like another look. And I mean, this is also one of my interests, that we go deeper into teasing in, as you said, into specific countries and sectors to understand more like the mechanisms behind that. So I think this would be something then, I think not in this paper, maybe a follow-up paper more with qualitative approaches.
Okay, thank you, Ina. Ronnie, please.
Ina.
Hello.
Thank you. It was very interesting. If I'm following up Manuel's question, I think it would be very interesting to have an interaction between the region and the importance of personal contact. So if you have this interaction, and of course, if it's significant, you can see if the personal contact has a stronger effect on the MENA region. So, and this is exactly what you are trying to ask. So maybe you did it and you didn't find it, but I think it's very important to have this interaction in the model.
But we had this interaction and it showed like a stronger connection with the MENA region.
I didn't see, maybe I didn't see it. It's very small. But if you have it, this is the main finding.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not the other coefficients are not important. The main thing is the interaction, and you can easily and very nicely graph. You can see it in a graph, these two lines, and this is convincing. I think this is the main finding of your research, I think.
Okay, thank you, Ronnie. Ina has some co-authors who I don't think are with us today, right? And I guess some of these co-authors are doing more of this statistical interactions and other things. So it would probably be better if we ask her questions related to the overall paper and not go into technicalities. Do we have any other questions?
But maybe let me see if my co-author is there. Fatih, I think he wanted to join. No, I don't see him.
No, I don't see him either. And I have to thank you, Ina, because you sent me the paper. I'm among the people who did receive this paper. And I looked at it fast. But since I looked at it fast, for instance, I didn't understand on how many countries this is, because I only saw the block number of respondents who don't seem to be the entire global corruption barometer, but still there are quite many. So it's probably half the global corruption barometer. So how many countries are here? And more to the point, when I hear all these statistical suggestions, which are very nice, my concern is rather than, the reason that we do these surveys and we study informality is to capture this grassroots level that Janine or Aliona work on, right? To capture the individual level, and then to have 80,000 respondents, and to this 80,000 respondents to attribute 20 or 30 country scores put by one expert in VDEM seems to me to blur the levels quite a bit and makes me a bit uneasy of what level are we actually inferring on, because it's one thing to infer or individual behavior, and it's a different thing to infer on entire countries. Can we do this? Is this the best use of global corruption barometer? If you look at direct results at this, you see that there is a universality on the diagnosis side. People are fairly upset by corruption in these countries as well as in the rest of the world. So another thing which I missed looking at the paper is really a discussion of results, because if you have 60-70% people upset and 10-15% people bribing, and then what you explain are just the people bribing, you lose a lot of the representativeness of this big number.
You're right. Just to give you more information, like we had a total of 108 countries, and out of them, 10 are from the MENA region. So we always try to compare it, like the bigger sample, like to the MENA region, excluding, of course, the MENA countries, to see if there is a connection, and it is. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. This was a very interesting paper, and I think that people should feel free to write to Ina to share copies and send her, that is why we're called Anti-Corruption in Progress, so that we collect this kind of remarks in time when people still work at these papers. I am also asked to remind you that we meet again in a month's time. This time we're have done at the very beginning to start with the conceptual framework of BridgeGap, where we're going to try to make a little bit of order between levels, like individual, this social norms, meso level, and the macro level, and also of the big methodological challenges that BridgeGap is supposed to solve, like measuring cross-border corruption and other more difficult things. I apologize for the people who still wanted to put questions. Please email to Ina directly, and see you in a month's time when the presentation will actually be done by our Luis team. Thanks, everybody. See you in a month.
And also keep in mind, like, yeah, here's, I think I forgot to show this. Here's the next dates for your for your talk. 20th of May, same time, yeah.
20th of May, same time. Okay. Thanks,
Thank you so
everyone.
much.
Ina in particular for this paper, and see you in a month's time.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.